to the meeting today. I'm joined by Martin from Acton Health and Safety, who's going to try and pick his way through these guidelines that have come out today. We've also got Dave, who many people will know as pub defender, but also operates his own pub. So I know he obviously had too much time on his hands. He was up reading these guidelines at 4 o'clock this morning, by all accounts. So the idea was really to have a look through the guidelines that have been produced for, as they say, restaurants, bars, pubs and takeaways, but we're really focusing on the pub side of things. They came out yesterday and really just trying to give a little bit of help and guidance to publicans about what they need to do before they reopen on the 4th. I'll let Dave has probably got some questions for Martin, but just before he does, I'd just like to ask Martin something. Certainly on first reading of this document, it looks very much like a kind of cut and paste job from some of the other guidelines that are already out there, with a few bits added. And what makes me say that is I think a lot of our members are already getting confused by one of the opening statements, which talks about it starts off with indoor gatherings should only be occurring in groups of 2 households, including support bubbles, while outdoor gatherings should be occurring in groups of up to 2 households, or a group of at most 6 people from any number of households. And a number of publicans are taking that they can only either have 2 families or 6 people in the pub. And that's causing all sorts of kind of chaos at the start. And the other one worth mentioning is they talk about keeping a record of customers and visitors to the pub, but they've said that BEIS, the government, are going to work with industry and relevant bodies to design a system in line with data protection legislation and set out the details shortly. Well, with only 10 days to go to opening, that'd be pretty urgent. But I mean, I don't know what you think of that, Martin. What the 2 points I just made.
Yeah, I actually the same thought. So initially, where you outlined about the people that come into the pub, there's also a bit on there about 30, and it's referring to outdoors, not indoors. So there's still no clear guidance on how many we can actually allow in the pub and how that's to be managed. They're saying 30 outside premises, but they're not saying about the inside premises. And as you said, having the bubble and the family rule in there is confusing for everyone as well. So I totally agree with that. The one about the personal details about recording them, it's going to be very hard to manage. Some people won't want to give that out because it's their own personal information. One of the thoughts I've had on it is you can actually get some very good GDPR compliant visitor record books that are widely available, and a lot of small companies use them to comply to the normal safety regulations that you have to do with recording coming into the work premise. I think that could be worked and used quite well without any cost, if that makes sense.
Okay, I shall make a note of that. We'll use that. Dave, I don't know if there was anything in particular that you wanted to go through with Martin. But...
well, yeah, we've had a few questions come through, Martin, and hello, it's good to put a face to a voice at last. So I've just got 4 questions really. I'll go through them one at a time. So they're pretty straightforward and simple. But the first one I was very interested in, and I think I mentioned it to you when we spoke. Who is going to police these guidelines? Who is going to be the enforcing agents in this situation?
Okay, so there's no actual guidelines within the documentation who's going to take on main responsibility for it. It does mention, however, that local authorities and police will be able to do on-the-spot fines and be able to tell people not that they have to leave the premise. So to me, from reading what they're saying in the guidelines, it's mainly going to be around the police, which we spoke about before, and I think that's who's going to So an added additional responsibility for the police when they're going to have their hands full with lots of other things anyway.
So that leads on to the next question, is that, you know, because of the extreme nature of the circumstances and the ambiguity certainly around about the guidelines, do you think people are going to have a strong argument, as long as they've got everything in place, to be able to protect their license should they end up being you know, somebody coming in and finding that things aren't exactly to the letter of how they expect them to be? How strict people are going to be? This is the question, you know.
Yeah. Well, within the world of health and safety, there is a term, reasonable and practicable. That is a go-to phrase, because you can only do so much within the lines of regulations that make it practical, accessible for small businesses. The guidelines that they've given are very interpretable. You know, you can make your own mind out of it. They're talking about not wearing PPE, and then they're talking about wearing PPE, about face masks and face shields. So as long as you can reasonably justify the action that you take, that will help go a long way to be able to support the reasons that you do certain things. One of the best ways, obviously, of doing that is to have a health and safety advisor point you in the right direction and support you on that, using the guidelines to be able to complete audits on your processes to make sure you are doing that reasonable and practical solution.
Okay, so the last two questions are kind of connected, and you've touched on them. Daniel Whitehead and Amy Miller have sent messages through. So can we operate without screens, and can we operate without masks? And I must admit, I wasn't quite clear, and I've read the guidelines twice.
Yeah. What I would say is it would depend on what you're putting in. So the issue we're going to have is they're saying that the 2 meter rule still applies unless you put additional safety measures in, and then it's 1 meter plus. The sort of things they're talking about is having people back to back rather than facing. Not having people face to face is one of the most important things. But then when you've got people taking orders, if you haven't got the ability to have an app, how do you get around that? They are saying not to wear PPE, as in the coverings, that because it's going to put obviously added in pressure on the NHS. But they do mention the face shield. So I don't know if you're aware of them, the full face plastic coverings that you can use. They're never going to stop someone from catching COVID-19, but they would help to prevent the spread of it because of the spray distance. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you. It just means everybody looks like TIG welders, of course. But there you go. I mean, that's it's just that. And obviously we got Stephen on. I'm sure he's going to contribute. But just a question from me, really. The practicalities of you know, a small pub. Well, not a small pub, but certainly an old pub with narrow corridors. You know, we have a toilet which we've spent a lot of money redoing the toilets, making them a lot easier and clean while we've been shut. But the bottom line is, you know, we've got a corridor outside our toilets which is 1 meter wide, no less. You know, how practically, what sort of measures do you think we need to put in place to cover us on issues like that?
I couldn't comment on a specific, because I hope you can appreciate I can't actually see it with live. But introducing one-way systems, so when you're in the queue, you're in the queue. Trying to reduce the queue as much as possible is obviously very important. And if there's a second direction of travel that they can then use when they're coming out of the toilet area. Obviously, a small pub, especially one that's from the turn of the century or before, they do have very narrow walkways, very small areas within the pub. I think you may call them snubs and things like that. In a way, you can try to use them as an advantage and zoning them off and trying to establish some sort of rota for the toilet. I really don't know is the answer, and it'd have to be done on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, but I think you said you're confident from well, not confident, but I don't think anybody's confident at the moment. But from what you've read in the regulations, you're able to put together a template risk assessment for us and for our members that we could, as a good base starting point for them to work on. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. So from looking at the guidelines, it can be quite adapted into a self-audit system where you can try and match what they're saying, and also a risk assessment. Again, it would have to be templated, and a risk assessment should be site-specific, but you can use a templated document as a good starting point and then develop it from there to turn it into a specific site risk assessment.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay. So we've got 2 people on board now.
I think Stephen's happy listening away. I'm just responding to him now. I've got a question that came up this morning when talking to a couple of people, and that was sorry. One of the big pieces, Martin, that came out yesterday and impacts on all of this is where we're talking about the distancing changing from 2 meters to 1 meter. And reading in the guidelines, it talks about you can reduce from 2 meter to 1 meter if you've taken mitigating actions. Now, maybe this was me not reading it too well, but I was struggling to find what mitigating actions you could actually take to enable that. I found a section that had further mitigating actions include, and it gave some examples. But if there was an original set of mitigating actions, I couldn't find them. Now, that's either me being a bit dim, but maybe you could enlighten me a bit on that one. What you take?
I've taken it as having face shields, putting people back to back rather than facing, using apps to order beverages. There is mention in there about having one waiter or waitress serving each table. How practical that is, I'd be quite surprised if a person would be able to have so many waitresses to serve the table, and then you're actually increasing the workforce within the premise. Because you know, if you've got 6 tables, their recommendation is it's a waitress per table, then you're bringing 6 people into the workplace, so that could cause issues as well. So to answer your question, it's having the plastic shielding in place, either the face covers or the permanent fixtures between tables, and then it's stuff like making sure cutlery is issued when someone orders food and not on the table, and no self-service of food as well. That's something I noticed within the guidelines. So they're saying that you can't do self-service of food.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, Ian, you've gone.
I can't hear you, Ian.
Ian, you've muted.
I have indeed, and I'm back again. So really, the section 1 on the guidelines, which talks about managing risk, if people read that further mitigating actions, which seems to cover what you've said, extra hand washing, surface cleaning, activity time, screens, barriers, that's the kind of stuff that you need to be thinking about putting in place if they're going to work to 1 meter.
Exactly, yeah. And it will be from risk assessment. So you can use an audit to make sure you're not missing any gaps, but then it will be a risk assessment that will identify what control measures you're going to put in place.
Right. Okay. That's brilliant. That helps me a lot. The only other, I suppose there was 2 areas from me that I was just that I was wondering about. Kitchens, obviously, potentially a big issue. It's one thing if, like Dave, and you can run the whole kitchen on your own, you know, with his phone in one hand and his fryer in the other, he's all right. But I guess kitchens might be an area of concern for people in particular if they're going to try and go back to serving food. Yeah, I don't know if there's any guidance, anything in particular around the operation of kitchens that you can think of.
There is some separate guidance on kitchens and food preparation, but it's not actually covered within the guidance document provided. It's just referred to.
Right. Okay. So that was one. The other one is, I suppose, utilisation of space. it seems from what I've heard, and it would seem that it's a lot safer to gather, albeit distanced, outside than in. There'll be a number of pubs that have got outside areas that they can use. There'll be others that have got maybe things like bowling greens, or if they're lucky enough to have a sports field, or they've got a big car park. I guess they could make some space there for customers, but there does seem to be a little bit of confusion in the main kind of the restrictions that are out there. The main restrictions that it's there, 0.43 in those restrictions, and I might be putting you on the spot here. This might not be one, but it has caused a bit of confusion. What they talk about is an area adjacent to the premises or of the business where seating is made available for customers of the business, whether it's your area or not, and whether or not you put the seating there, will be classed until they change the legislation as part of that premises or business. So landlords and publicans are going to have to be very careful, not only in making sure that the spaces is right on their areas, but also if there's areas around the pub where people are likely to buy product and then go off to drink it, they're going to have to make sure that that's treated in a similar way. If I've read that right, I hope that wasn't too complex.
No, it's so there's a few things that we need to consider to add on to that question. So there is parts of the guidance that's referring to local informing local authorities when there's a group of hospitality businesses that are reopening in a small area, and you have to notify the local authorities so that they'll know that you're going to open, because the effect of the public gathering in one main area, because if you have 2 or 3 pubs by each other, I can think of my high street. There's 4 or 5 pubs on the same stretch, like probably most others. When you have people leaving, that's going to increase the number within that area, which is going to cause it a lot harder issues when you talk about social distancing. And then added to that, as you said, when pubs are using local areas next to them, who's using that area, which other pubs are using that area. Maybe it's going to have to be obviously measured on each circumstance. Maybe a couple of the pubs in the local area getting together, coming up with a plan to manage that social distance in them areas would be an idea, but the specific would be hard to answer.
Martin, it's interesting.
Yeah.
No, sorry. It's interesting for what you're saying in terms of, even someone with your knowledge and experience and having the guidelines in front of you, there's a lot of, and this is in no way a criticism at all, because you're a lot more confident than we have been, having looked at them. But there's a lot of maybes and suppositions, isn't there? Do we have, in your opinion, an argument to go back to bays and basically say, these are just not good enough? Is it? I mean, not that we're going to come back and say, Martin from Acton solved this. But we obviously, our concern is, we're representing, we're a new organisation. We're representing 300 plus people in a very short space of time, which gives us a very good voice, and we can we now have to be listened to. Our opinion is these guidelines are not good, and they are open to interpretation, which is going to create major issues. And that's really where we're coming from. And if so, is there a we understand that these were addressed and put together with the support of the HSE. But again, we're not sure about that. So is there an argument to say that we should be going back and shouting that we need more clarity?
Thanks for putting me on the spot.
That's okay.
What I would say is it needs evidence. So because there's no pubs and there's no industries that are currently open to do the actions, you can't learn from the actions, and you can't improve on them. they've given a very broad set of guidance that, as I was highlighted at the beginning, seems to be a little bit of a cut and paste job in certain areas.
Yeah.
But I'll also go back to what I said before about reasonable and practical, and it being down to the PERB or the chain that are putting in the processes and reviewing their steps. Within HSE, they never give you specific in a specific case on a specific circumstances. It has to be a general view, if that makes sense, because otherwise HSE, all they're ever going to do is review every single specific policy for a company, and then the next policy will be different, even though they're the same type of company, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So there has to be a certain give and take in it, and it's that reasonable, practical saying that I would touch on and use, and it's having the right advice and opinion from a advisor that will help along the way, and making sure that they approach it in a sensible way. That's the best way I can answer that question.
Oh, no, that's great. I mean, what that really leads us on to is the fact that we need to be obtaining as much information from the 4th of July onwards from our members to get, concrete and evidence as to the problems that they've faced, so that we can go back to government with valid information and ask them to, to take these points on board. So that's really helpful. So thank you for that.
Okay.
That's brilliant. Well, I think that probably brings us neatly to the end of the time, and we can make this available to other members. We'll put the video live, and obviously I'll send a link to yourself, Martin. But thank you both very much indeed for doing this. And Martin, thank you very much for pulling together that risk assessment. That'll be really useful, the risk assessment that we can get out to members. So Dave, thank you. Martin, thank you. Karen, Stephen, thank you very much for dialing in. Hopefully you found it useful.
Thanks so much.
All right, and we'll catch you all.
Could I just raise one point, please, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just very quickly, my experience to date is there's a lot of shortages with PPE supplies. So it just be a key point would be that although the design might be to get supplies of visors and such like for staff to wear, just be very aware that supplies are in short demand, and quite a few premises might have trouble sourcing them. I'm thinking of a current order I've got in, and there's a long delay. The delivery times keep being put back. So it was just a point really regarding PPE shortages, and just be aware that they're ongoing.
So some people, Stephen, might be forced to open with the 2 meters in place because they haven't got the PPE to bring it down below to the 1 meter stage. Is that what you're saying, effectively?
Yeah, that's the point, Dave. I mean, it's just, as I say, I've seen the troubles that some businesses are having trying to get hold of PPE. And you can imagine at the moment, everyone will be trying to, there's going to be licensed premises across the country joining that list of businesses trying to get hold of stuff. And the supplies are, they're in short supply, and a lot of the stuff, ironically, is coming in freight containers from China.
Dave and I were hoping that the pub companies would include PPE as part of the score that they gave to all the pubs. That's a bit of wishful thinking probably, but it wouldn't have been a bad idea.
Thank you for that, Steve. That's really good, because it's made me think I need to get on the phone.
Yeah. No, thank you. Very interesting session. Thanks for your time.
Not at all. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.